On April 2, 2025, Donald Trump did something unprecedented in modern American history. He declared a national emergency over the U.S. trade deficit. And in response to that emergency, he imposed tariffs on virtually every country we trade with. He called it Liberation Day. Within days, the stock market crashed. China retaliated with counter-tariffs that escalated into a full-blown trade war. Used tariffs on Chinese goods hit 145%. China fired back with 125%. By December, the U.S. government had collected over $200 billion in tariff revenue. That's more than the entire GDP of New Zealand. In 1 year, the average U.S. tariff rate shot from 2.5% to 27%, the highest level in over a century. Federal courts ruled the tariffs illegal, saying Trump exceeded his presidential authority. But they're still in effect while the Supreme Court decides the case. So here we are. The biggest trade war in generations. Prices rising for American consumers. Allies turning into adversaries. And the entire economic establishment from Wall Street to Main Street arguing over whether this is economic patriotism or economic suicide. But there's a voice missing from this debate. A voice that cuts through the noise of partisanship, nationalism, and economic fear-mongering. Ayn Rand's voice. In this video, I'm going to analyze Trump's 2025 tariffs through the lens of objectivist philosophy. Not as a conservative, not as a liberal, but as someone asking one simple question. What does rational self-interest actually look like in trade policy? Because here's what most people don't understand. Ayn Rand wasn't against America winning. She was against the way most people think about winning. Let's break this down. Ayn Rand had a very clear position on trade. She called protectionism economic nationalism, and she considered it one of the most destructive ideas in human history. Not because she was against nations, not because she didn't care about American workers, but because protectionism fundamentally misunderstands what trade actually is. Here's the principle: trade is not war. Trade is not a zero-sum game where one side wins and the other loses. Trade is an exchange of value for value. Both sides benefit, or the trade doesn't happen. Rand called this the trader principle. It's the moral foundation of capitalism. You produce something of value, someone else produces something of value. You trade voluntarily. Both of you are better off. That's what free markets are built on. But protectionism rejects this principle entirely. It treats trade like a battlefield. It assumes that when China sells us smartphones, they're winning and we're losing. It assumes that a trade deficit buying more from other countries than they buy from us is a national emergency. Ayn Rand would call this premise irrational and dangerous. Why? Because protectionism doesn't protect producers. It protects inefficient producers at the expense of everyone else. It has a transfer of wealth from consumers and efficient businesses to politically connected industries that can compete on merit. Think about it this way. If I buy a cheaper, better product from someone in another country, I'm not being attacked. I'm making a rational choice. The producer in my country who can't compete isn't being victimized, he's being outperformed. And instead of adapting, improving, or finding a better use for his skills, protectionism lets him demand that the government force me to buy his inferior product at a higher price. That's not capitalism. That's coercion. Now here is the historical example Rand would point to, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. The U.S. government, trying to protect American jobs during the Great Depression, raised tariffs to record levels. Other countries retaliated. Global trade collapsed. And what was supposed to save the economy helped destroy it. Sound familiar? Trump's tariffs aren't just bad policy. They're philosophically corrupt. They substitute force for merit. They punish productivity and reward political pull. And they abandon the very principle that made America wealthy in the first place, the freedom to trade. Let's start with the obvious question. What would Ayn Rand say about Trump's tariffs? She'd say they're a betrayal of American principles. Not liberal principles, not conservative principles. The founding principle of this country, individual rights. Because here's what a tariff actually is. It's a tax. When Trump imposes a 25% tariff on Mexican imports, he's not punishing Mexico. He's taxing you. Every American who buys products from Mexico now pays 25% more. The Mexican company doesn't write a check to the U.S. Treasury, you do, through higher prices. So when Trump collected $200 billion in tariff revenue in 2025, where do you think that money came from? It came from American consumers and businesses. That's $200 billion extracted from people who voluntarily chose to buy foreign products because they were the best option available. Rand would call this theft by another name. In Atlas Shrugged, she wrote about exactly this kind of policy. Politicians claiming to protect the economy while actually protecting their cronies. Industrialists using government force to eliminate competition instead of earning market share through better products. And the productive class, the actual creators of wealth, getting bled dry to subsidize mediocrity. Trump's justification is reciprocity. He says other countries charge us tariffs, so we should charge them tariffs. Fair is fair, right? Wrong. Rand would say, if another country punishes its own citizens with tariffs, that's their loss. Why would you punish your own citizens in response? If China makes it expensive for Chinese people to buy American goods, the solution isn't to make it expensive for Americans to buy Chinese goods. That's like saying, my neighbor shot himself in the foot, so I'm going to shoot myself in the foot to make it fair. It's not reciprocity, it's mutual destruction. Now let's talk about who actually benefits from these tariffs. Because in any Rand analysis, you have to identify the producers and the parasites. The producers are the people creating value. In this case, that's American consumers making rational purchasing decisions. It's efficient American businesses that use imported materials to create products. It's innovators who thrive in competitive global markets. The parasites? They're the politically connected industries demanding protection. Steel companies that can't compete with more efficient foreign producers. Auto manufacturers that want you to pay more for cars so they don't have to improve quality. Agricultural lobbies that lose export markets when other countries retaliate, but then demand taxpayer bailouts to cover their losses. Here's a concrete example. Trump imposed 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. The justification was national security. We need domestic steel production in case of war. But here's what actually happened. American companies that use steel and aluminum construction companies, manufacturers, small businesses saw their costs skyrocket. They had to raise prices, cut jobs, or shut down entirely. Meanwhile, the handful of steel companies that got protection? They didn't innovate. They didn't improve. They just raised prices because they could. That's parasitism. Using government force to extract wealth from productive people without creating any value in return. And here's the kicker. Those steel companies didn't even increase production significantly. They just increased profits. Because when you eliminate foreign competition through government force, you don't have to be better. You just have to be protected. Rand wrote about this in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. She said that when businessmen turn to government for favors instead of earning money in the marketplace, they stop being capitalists. They become what she called aristocrats of pull, people who get rich through political connections, not productive achievement. That's exactly what's happening here. Trump's tariffs aren't protecting the American economy. They're protecting specific companies at everyone else's expense. So what happens next? What are the inevitable consequences of this policy? First, retaliation. And we've already seen it. China didn't just accept higher U.S. tariffs. They imposed counter-tariffs. The trade war escalated. U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods hit 145%. China fired back with 125% tariffs on American products. Who gets hurt? American farmers who can't sell soybeans to China. American manufacturers who can't export machinery. Every American business that depends on global supply chains. And this isn't theoretical. In April 2025, major U.S. retail CEOs warned Trump directly. These tariffs will cause visible price increases and product shortages within weeks. Not months. Weeks. Second consequence. Economic distortion. When you artificially raise the price of imports, you don't just help domestic producers. You force the entire economy to reorganize around inefficiency. Resources that could have been used productively get diverted to industries that only survive because of government protection. Think about it. If American steel is only competitive because of a 50% tariff, that means we're using land, labor, and capital to produce something we could buy more cheaply elsewhere. Those resources could have been used in industries where America actually excels: technology, pharmaceuticals, aerospace. Instead, they're trapped in protected industries that will collapse the moment the tariffs are removed. Rand called this the frozen economy, an economy where innovation stops because success depends on political favor, not productive achievement. Third consequence, legal chaos. Federal courts have already ruled Trump's tariffs illegal. The Court of Appeals said Congress has the constitutional power to impose taxes, not the president. But Trump imposed them anyway using emergency powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So now we have tariffs that may be unconstitutional, collecting hundreds of billions of dollars, while the Supreme Court decides if they're even legal. What happens if the court rules against Trump? Do companies get refunds? Does the entire trade policy collapse overnight? This is what happens when policy is based on emotion and political posturing instead of rational principles. You get chaos. Here's what almost nobody is talking about. This isn't really about trade. It's about control. Trump framed his tariffs as economic patriotism. America first. Protecting jobs. Standing up to China. It sounds good. It appeals to people who feel left behind by globalization. But here's what Ayn Rand would see. This is collectivism. It's the exact same premise as socialism, just wrapped in a nationalist flag. The collectivist premise is this: the individual doesn't matter. What matters is the group. Your rights, your choices, your rational self-interest, all of that is irrelevant if it conflicts with the national interest. So when you choose to buy a cheaper, better product from another country, the government says, no, that's unpatriotic. You have a duty to buy American, even if it's more expensive and lower quality. Your individual judgment doesn't matter. The collective, the nation, takes priority. That's not capitalism. That's nationalism. And nationalism, Rand argued, is just tribalism with better PR. Here's the insight most people miss. Free trade isn't about being nice to other countries. It's about respecting individual rights. When the government restricts trade, it's not protecting you from China. It's controlling you. It's saying you don't have the right to make your own economic decisions. It's saying politicians know better than you what you should buy, what you should pay, and who you should trade with. And once you accept that premise that the government can override your choices for the national good, you accepted the fundamental premise of every authoritarian regime in history. Rand saw this clearly. Economic freedom and political freedom are inseparable. You can't have one without the other. The same government that controls your trade can control your speech, your property, your life. Trump's tariffs aren't just bad economics. They're a philosophical precedent. They normalize the idea that the government can restrict your freedom whenever it declares an emergency. And once that precedent is set, there's no limit to what they can justify. Okay, so we've analyzed the philosophy, the economics, the consequences. But let's bring this back to you. You might be thinking, I'm not a CEO. I don't run a multinational corporation. How do Trump's tariffs actually affect my life? Here's how. First, the immediate impact. You're paying more for everything: groceries, electronics, clothes, cars, building materials. Anything that's imported or made with imported components just got more expensive. Let's say you're planning to buy a new laptop. That laptop probably has components from China, Taiwan, South Korea, with tariffs averaging 15 to 27%. You're not just paying the sticker price anymore. You repaying the sticker price plus a tax that goes straight to the government money that doesn't make the laptop better, doesn't improve the technology, doesn't benefit you in any way. Or maybe you're a small business owner. You manufacture products using imported steel. Your costs just went up 50% overnight. You have three choices: raise prices and lose customers, absorb the cost and destroy your profit margin, or shut down and lay off your employees. And here's the part that really matters. You didn't choose this. You didn't vote for higher costs. You didn't agree to subsidize inefficient steel companies. The decision was made for you, and you're paying the price. That's the personal reality of protectionism. It's not abstract economic theory. It's your money, your choices, your freedom being sacrificed for someone else's political agenda. Now here's the objectivist question you need to ask yourself. Are you going to accept this? Because here's what most people do. They complain. They blame China. They blame immigrants. They blame globalization. But they accept the premise. They accept that the government has the right to control trade for the national good. They accept that their individual choices should be subordinated to collective interests. And once you accept that premise, you've lost. Because you're not arguing about policy anymore. You're arguing about which collective interest takes priority. Should we protect steel workers or tech workers? Farmers or manufacturers? Red states or blue states? But those are the wrong questions. The right question is, why does anyone have the right to use government force to restrict my freedom to trade? Let me give you a concrete example of what I mean. Imagine you're looking for a new car. You find two options: an American-made car for $40,000 And a Japanese car better fuel efficiency, better safety ratings, better reliability for $35,000. Rationally, you choose the Japanese car. It's the better product at the better price. But then the government imposes a 25% tariff on imported cars. Now that Japanese car costs $43,750. The American car is suddenly cheaper, so you buy the American car, not because it's better. Not because you wanted it. But because the government forced your hand. Now ask yourself, who benefited from that transaction? Not you. You paid more for an inferior product. Not the Japanese company. They lost the sale. The only winner? The American car company that didn't have to improve quality or lower prices because the government eliminated their competition. That's not free trade. That's not capitalism. That's corporatism using government force to benefit politically connected businesses at everyone else's expense. And here's what Ayn Rand would tell you. You don't have to accept it. Not by voting differently, not by complaining on social media, but by understanding the principle at stake and refusing to concede the moral high ground. Because right now, the debate is framed as patriots versus globalists. As if choosing what's best for yourself is somehow unpatriotic, as if rational self-interest is selfish and wrong. But Rand would flip that narrative completely. She'd say, rational self-interest is patriotic. Because a free country is one where individuals have rights. Where you can pursue your own happiness without the government forcing you to sacrifice for the collective. When you choose the best product at the best price, you're not betraying your country, you're exercising your rights. And when the government stops you from making that choice, they're the ones betraying American principles, not you. So here's the action I want you to take. Stop accepting collectivist premises in economic debates. When someone says we need tariffs to protect American jobs, ask them, why do those jobs deserve protection if they can't compete on merit? When someone says buying foreign products hurts America, ask them, am I not part of America? Why doesn't my rational choice count? When someone says trade deficits are a crisis, ask them, if I voluntarily buy more from other people than they buy from me, am I in crisis? Or am I just making choices? These aren't just rhetorical questions. They expose the philosophical corruption at the heart of protectionism. And once you expose it, once you refuse to concede the premise, the entire argument collapses. Because protectionism only works if you accept that your rights don't matter, that your judgment is irrelevant, that you exist to serve the collective. And you don't. Let's step back from Trump's tariffs for a moment. Because in 5 years, 10 years, these specific policies might be gone. Different president, different Congress, different political climate. But the principle behind them, that's not going anywhere. Because here is what Ayn Rand understood. The battle between free trade and protectionism isn't really about economics. It's about philosophy. It's about whether individuals have rights or whether they exist to serve the collective. And that battle has been raging for centuries. In the 1800s, it was the Corn Laws and Britain tariffs designed to protect British landowners by making imported grain more expensive. Poor people starved while aristocrats got rich. Eventually, the laws were repealed, but only after decades of suffering. In the 1930s, it was Smoot-Hawley in America. Protect American jobs turned into a global trade collapse that deepened the Great Depression and set the stage for World War II. In the 1980s, it was Japan is buying America, the same fear-mongering we hear about China today. Politicians demanded trade restrictions. Economists warned of catastrophe, and what happened? Japan's economy stagnated for decades while America continued to innovate and grow. The pattern is always the same. Economic anxiety. Fear of foreign competition. Politicians promising to protect their citizens, and then? Disaster. Why? Because protectionism is based on a fundamentally irrational premise that wealth is a zero-sum game. That if someone else succeeds, you lose. That trade is war, not cooperation. Rand demolished this premise in Atlas Shrugged. She showed that wealth isn't stolen, it's created. That when productive people trade freely, everyone benefits. But when the government intervenes, when force replaces merit, the entire system collapses. Here's the timeless lesson. You can't build prosperity on coercion. Every time a government restricts trade, they're not protecting their economy. They're crippling it. Because economic growth requires innovation, competition, and the freedom to fail. When you protect inefficient industries from competition, you don't preserve jobs, you freeze the economy in place. Think about it historically. What made America the richest country in human history? Was it tariffs? Was it economic nationalism? No, it was the opposite. It was economic freedom. The freedom to innovate, to compete, to succeed or fail based on merit. The Industrial Revolution didn't happen because governments protected blacksmiths from steam engines. It happened because new technology was allowed to destroy old industries and create better ones. The internet didn't happen because governments protected telephone companies from competition. It happened because innovators were free to disrupt entire industries. That's capitalism, creative destruction. The old and inefficient being replaced by the new and better. And it's brutal if you're on the losing side. But it's the only system that's ever lifted billions of people out of poverty. Protectionism rejects all of that. It says, the old ways are sacred. Change is dangerous. The collective, whether it's the nation, the workers, the industry, must be preserved, even if it means sacrificing progress. And here's what Rand would tell you, that's not compassion. That's stagnation masquerading as morality. Because when you protect inefficient steel companies from competition, you're not saving jobs. You're preventing the economy from evolving. Those workers, that capital, those resources, they could be used productively in growing industries. But instead, they're trapped in a dying industry that only survives through government force. That's not kindness. That's cruelty. You're condemning people to obsolescence instead of helping them adapt. Now here's the principle that transcends Trump, transcends 2025, transcends any specific policy debate. Freedom works. Coercion doesn't. When individuals are free to trade, to innovate, to pursue their rational self-interest, prosperity follows. When governments intervene, when they substitute force for freedom, poverty follows. This isn't opinion. This is historical fact. Every socialist economy has collapsed. Every protectionist regime has stagnated. Every country that's embraced free markets has prospered. And yet every generation has to relearn this lesson. Because the temptation is always the same. Use government force to get what you want instead of earning it. Protect yourself from competition instead of competing better. Sacrifice freedom for security. But it never works. Because you can't violate reality and expect to succeed. Ayn Rand was right. Not because she was American, not because she hated communism, but because she understood a fundamental truth. Human beings thrive through reason, production, and voluntary trade. Anything else is just different flavors of self-destruction. Trump's tariffs will eventually be remembered as another failed experiment in economic nationalism. But the principle Rand defended, individual rights, free markets, rational self-interest, that's eternal. That's what you need to hold on to when the next crisis comes. When the next politician promises to protect you by restricting your freedom. When the next collective demand requires your sacrifice. Because the battle isn't over. It never is. So let's recap what we've covered. Trump's 2025 tariffs aren't economic policy. They're philosophical betrayal. They reject the trader principle, the idea that trade is voluntary exchange of value for value. They treat commerce as warfare. And they punish American consumers to subsidize politically connected industries that can't compete on merit. Ayn Rand would see this clearly. These aren't tariffs protecting America. They're taxes on Americans. They're government force replacing individual choice. They're collectivism wrapped in a nationalist flag. The producers, consumers, efficient businesses, innovators are paying the price. The parasites protected industries that survive through political pull, not productive achievement, are reaping the rewards. And the consequences? Retaliation, economic distortion, legal chaos, higher prices, fewer choices, less freedom. But here's the timeless principle that matters beyond any one policy. You cut and build prosperity on coercion. Free trade isn't about being nice to other countries. It's about respecting individual rights. And when governments restrict those rights, even for patriotic reasons, they're not protecting you. They're controlling you. That's the lesson. That's what Rand understood. And that's what you need to remember the next time someone promises to protect you by restricting your freedom. Now, I want to hear from you. What current event do you want me to analyze through the Rand lens? Political controversy? Corporate scandal? Social movement? Drop it in the comments. If I see enough interest, I'll make it the next video. And if this analysis helped you see trade policy differently, if it gave you a rational framework for cutting through the political noise, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Because we're not here to pick sides. We're here to think clearly. Next video, I'm breaking down workplace boundaries through Ayn Rand's philosophy. How to recognize when your company is exploiting your productivity. when loyalty becomes self-sacrifice, and how to protect your rational self-interest without becoming the office villain. Until then, remember, trade isn't war. Competition isn't cruelty. And choosing what's best for yourself isn't selfish, it's rational. See you in the next one.